I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for our book club conversation with Dr. Monique Couvson, founder of the National Black Women's Justice Institute, and also important, an esteemed author of Pushout, the Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools, as well as Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, Liberatory Education for Black and Brown Girls, which is the book we are discussing tonight. I am Sydney McKinney, the Executive Director of the National Black Women's Justice Institute. For those of you who are new to the organization, the National Black Women's Justice Institute is a Black women-led national nonprofit working to end the systemic criminalization of Black women and girls. We research and elevate innovative community-led solutions and new models of safety and justice for Black women and girls. And we lead research, advocacy, and capacity building work in partnership with directly impacted Black women and girls in order to dismantle the racist and patriarchal US criminal legal system and build in its place pathways to opportunity and healing. We're so happy that you are here with us. And really, if you don't understand how important this work is, you will understand more tonight. And if you do, we are so happy you are here with us, helping to move forward this really important conversation and systems change that we're working towards. In 2021, the National Black Women's Justice Institute launched our book club to help advance a dialogue about the criminalization and punishment and incarceration of Black women and girls. In a world where there is a lot written about us and the problems that plague our community, we wanted to have a conversation that centers the lived experiences and scholarship of Black women and girls, highlighting our strengths and the solutions we are creating to liberate ourselves from the systems that are so eager to criminalize and punish us. So thank you all for joining us for tonight's discussion with Dr. Monique Couvson, formerly Dr. Monique Morris. Dr. Couvson is an award-winning author and social justice scholar with 3 decades of experience in the areas of education, civil rights, juvenile, and criminal justice. Her research intersects race, gender, education, and justice to explore the ways in which Black communities and other communities of color are uniquely affected by social policies. Dr. Couvson is the president and CEO of Grantmakers for Girls of Color, which has developed 4 signature funds, including the Black Girl Freedom Fund. She is also, as I've already mentioned, probably her proudest achievement, the founder and board chair for the National Black Women's Justice Institute. And Dr. Couvson's work has been profiled everywhere imaginable in national, local, print, radio, and television media. Dr. Couvson, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am so excited to be in conversation with you, the founder of this incredible organization, and work that has inspired me, and I know so many of the people who are joining us tonight.
Thanks, Sydney. I'm really excited to be on. I'm actually really excited to talk about Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues. Everybody talks about Pushout, which I'm grateful for and excited about too, but I've always been like, there's some more stuff, like there's more to the conversation. So I'm really excited to be here with you in this way.
Thank you. You and I recently had a conversation, and you said that Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues was such an important follow-up to Pushout, right? Pushout is telling us about all of the problems, and there are solutions, and there are incredible things that people are doing in the field, in schools, to really create and transform schools into healing spaces that Black girls deserve. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation, because you're right, this isn't the conversation we're having enough. I want to say, you have been a trailblazer in this field, right? Like in a field where people have been talking about the detrimental consequences of school to confinement pathways and have really been focused on boys, you have been the voice really leading the charge and reminding us and bringing attention to those very same discipline practices, exclusionary discipline practices, have significant detrimental effects for Black girls as well. what inspired you to do this work and to really stand in a space that no one else was standing in and demand that folks really consider the direct impact of school discipline policies on Black girls?
I've known for a very long time that girls were also impacted by the reach of the juvenile court system, the criminal legal system, and the disciplinary practices in schools that lead them there. My first sort of formal interactions with girls who had been detained or incarcerated was in 1995. And at that point, there was very little conversation about what was happening with girls. There was very little data available because, people weren't asking the question about girls. But I had the opportunity to go into multiple facilities in the mid-1990s and talk to girls around the country who were experiencing various forms of exclusionary discipline that led to ultimately participation in underground economies that then led them to contact with the juvenile court system or the criminal legal system. And so it has been sort of a part of my consciousness for a very long time, just from my experience. And then when we saw the data and we looked and explored what was happening systemically with girls and found that, Black girls were the only group of girls who were disproportionately overrepresented across the spectrum of discipline and at every educational level. And when we saw that Black girls were uniquely impacted by many of the tropes and stereotypes that inform our interactions with them outside of school, certainly inside of school as well, it wasn't enough for me just to say there's disparity, oh well, or there's disparity, isn't that sad? Right? Like for me, it was about challenging a public narrative in a lot of advocacy spaces, civil rights spaces, advocacy spaces, educational spaces, that was telling us on one end that the girls were fine and the girls were doing better than everyone else. And on the other end, I was witnessing a host of harms that made it such that many Black girls, too many Black girls, and for the record, one is too many, but too many Black girls, and consistently Black girls who were graduating and doing okay despite what happened in their lives, not because of what happened in their lives. And so the fact that Black girls have a unique form of resilience that allows for them to appear as if they are okay doesn't mean they're actually okay. And when you ask different questions about well-being and you ask different questions about experiences, you get radically different answers. And it was worth me spending the time, and it's always worth me spending the time. I've been known to say that we invest in Black girls, we engage in the study of Black girlhood because Black girls are worthy, right? They're worthy of our interrogation. They're worthy of our engagement, and certainly worthy of our support.
Thank you. I am so excited to talk about this book because I think it's asking us to restore the promise of what schools can actually provide young people that isn't accessible to all young people, unfortunately. There's data that shows that schools have a protective effect, that young people who feel connected to school have lower rates of depression, lower risk of substance use, lower risk of engaging in behaviors that might bring them in contact with the juvenile legal system. But and we know from our work that that is not a truth that is really reflective of all young people's experiences. And I think this book is the guide to how we can create schools that really restore the promise of what education can do for all of us when we have access to it. So tell us a little bit about why Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues was important for you to write. And I'd also really love for you to talk about why you used blues as like the metaphor to move this discourse forward.
Yeah, thank you. So when I was starting to write it, obviously I was clear that I wanted to present a framework for understanding how schools could become locations for healing. I say often that schools need to be locations for healing so that they can be locations for learning, understanding that when we are responsive to the conditions that cause harm, then we're able to create pathways for young people to feel safe enough to learn. The location of these healing modalities and sort of the articulation of healing modalities is not something we might automatically associate with the blues, right? That when you listen to the blues and you listen to a lot of particularly the lyrics and sort of stylings of women who sing blues, I was really struck by the honesty. I was struck by the audacity. I was struck by the things that have been central to the ability for Black women, especially, and other women of color more broadly, to be able to survive in some of these systems that work consistently to suppress their voices and to oppress their bodies. And so it was, for me, an opportunity to listen to the blues a little differently and to draw out some of the things that I think might be applicable to how we approach our learning and how we engage. I wrote in the sort of early parts of Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues that the blues women and the blues as a genre invite us into a conversation about how one is negotiating some pretty heinous conditions with the kind of honesty that is required for us to actually begin to traverse that threshold into the next phase of our existence and the next phase of our participation in complex systems or in complex relationships. And ultimately, schools are about relationships. And so while the blues women are singing about a different kind of relationship, typically, it is an opportunity for us to think about what might be something that allows us to live in our bodies and engage in the multiple ways of knowing and extend epistemology in a way that invites us to get creative and to really think about what else is in schools that we're not tapping into that could provide opportunities for girls, particularly Black and brown girls who are disproportionately experiencing schools as locations for punishment and harm, how we transform those relationships such that we spend less time focusing on the wrong things and more time focusing on the things that will actually cultivate learning and create new opportunities for them to stay in school. I think writing it as I sort of approached the book as a track, like as a record. And so chapters are tracks, and there are interludes, and there's a coda, because I really wanted to challenge those of us who do this work to uplift the healing modality of the arts. Also, as we really think about this work, we can get very intellectual and heady and live in theories that do not respond to the full physicality of what it is to experience school. And so I wanted to challenge those of us who are committed and interested in learning about pathways forward to live somewhere else, to take some different breaths. If you read music, you'll recognize some of the symbols that are in there, and to really think about how you take a beat and how that might change the cadence of how we engage with our young people. And so that was intentional. Everything in this book was intentional. And so I really appreciate the close reads of Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, and the folks who really do spend some time with each track and who listen to and read the words of the interludes, and these women who have been working very closely with girls throughout the United States, and many of whom, have been trailblazers and leaders in their own right around how to respond to young people and to forge paths that allow for our girls to be seen, and also, when they are seen, engaged with dignity and with opportunities for healing. And so it was really important, I think, to do that. And it was fun to write that way.
I have to say, it was very cool to read. I loved all of it. I especially loved the interludes with women who've been doing this work for a really long time, whose experiences really ranges from providing direct services to being educators. And it was just really nice to hear them reflect on how to support Black girls and other girls of color. It was a very nice way that you set that up, especially because, as you said, we can be very intellectual about these issues. So to bring it back to what's so real was really nice as a way to break that up. So thank you so much for the thoughtfulness. I want to ask you a question about freedom work. What is freedom work? I know that you have had a big campaign around freedom work in the past, but for those of us who are not sure, like, what is freedom work and why is that work so important, and how does it relate to Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues?
Yeah, I talk broadly about education as freedom work because, from at its core, we know that education is a critical protective factor against contact with the juvenile court and criminal legal system for girls. And because it plays such a significant role in keeping girls away from the system that incarcerates and that takes away freedom, quite literally, education is freedom work. That the more we create spaces for our girls and other students to be in spaces of learning, connected to their education and thriving in those spaces, the less likely they are to be in the system that takes away their freedom, that strips them of their freedom, which is our carceral system. And so in that regard, it is quite literally, as I said, freedom work to engage in education. The other thing, though, is that when you think about the Black feminist writers who have explored concepts of love, who have explored concepts of justice, who have been looking at how we build out learning spaces and loving spaces for Black women and girls, there is this acknowledgement that in our capacity to really respond to girls in real time or ourselves in real time, is embedded this notion of us working toward freedom. Bell Hooks writes about it, right? Like, Toni Morrison wrote about it in various ways. Like, we were seeing it show up in a lot of different creative spaces and also in a number of, like I said, Black feminist literature and essays. And so I wanted to call in that energy. I think with this project in particular, it was really important for me. I did this somewhat in Pushout, but in this project in particular, I did a lot of calling in of the wisdom and reasonings of elder Black women. And I wanted to do that, to signal a couple of things. One is that this has been going on a long time. And the conversations that we're having about ways to support Black girls is a conversation that we've been having for a very long time. I remember, I wasn't surprised by this, but I remember on my first round of tours for Pushout, there were grandmothers who would be in the audience and who would start crying because they felt, sad that what had happened to them was still happening to their grandchildren, that these elders were working through their own relationships with schools as elders. And so we still were negotiating, these big questions for a very long time. And so it was important for me in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues to, sort of call in much of the thinking and many of the experiences of women who are now women, right? And to think back on what we might have been able to do differently and what is available to us in our contemporary learning spaces that may not have been available to them, and to exercise some of that. So the freedom work, sort of framework allows for us to understand not just that education is the critical protective factor against contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system, but to also recognize that this is, the act of going to school can be perceived by many as a radical act of resistance to oppression. Okay, going to school and thriving in school and being able to bring your full self to school can be a radical act. It is a way of understanding what has been under-theorized, I think, in education. I think Bettina Love does a fantastic job of locating this notion of abolition and really thinking about how to uplift some of these core concepts in practice, right, with teachers and with other educators. And it's a really important part of how we understand our overall rights work, our human rights work, our justice, our work, not justice criminal legal system, but justice broad sense work. And so it is, it was important to sort of signal all those different things and to, invite our broader community into that conversation.
That uh, that point that you just hit on of like how difficult it is for us to show up as our full selves in school, I think is why so many Black women really relate to Pushout. And this book is that we have, like, to me, I'm feeling that right now. That's a story that we have going to school, whether you have experienced exclusionary discipline or not. As a Black girl, you don't feel like you can be there. You don't feel like you can be yourself. And like the idea that we're trying to create spaces where Black girls know that they belong, not just that they feel that they belong, but know that they belong, is so important and sadly radical, right?
Oh yeah, it is sadly radical. And even in, Sing Rhythm Dance the Blues, some of the young people that I interview for this project talk about how they, don't even see themselves located in the curriculum. Like they just don't see themselves in school. Like I think the quote was that she sees her body in school, but her mind is not in school. Her mind is not activated by her learning space because she can't locate herself there. And, I spend some time, in this project talking about the savior complex and the problem with it, right? That we see play out in our schools in dangerous ways. But that also is how Black girls don't locate themselves, because Black girls and other girls of color, like Black and Latina students, are more likely to identify as leaders, right? But they're less likely to be engaged as leaders in schools from research that girls' leadership did. And so it's really important to think about how girls are not just satisfied with seeing their physical bodies in schools, or even seeing a Black teacher, although those are necessary, right? Or even you're just saying, okay, here's a book about Rosa Parks. It's February. This is our time, right? But thinking about how to uplift and engage her throughout the learning, so that as she and other students are processing some of this work, that they're able to recognize the value of being a learner in a Black girl body. And that prevents us from then adultifying her in some ways, right? Or thinking about her only as a peripheral character in the learning, rather than a critical part of our collective learning.
You mention in the book, which I think is just such an important point, right? We've talked a little bit about it now, is that schools, while they may not intend to cause harm, they do, right? In the ways that were not featured in the curriculum, but also in ways, just like the policies that exist, the practices that are not challenged. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the ways that schools and our classrooms are facilitative of or neglectful of trauma rather than responsive to it.
I think one of the critical things that we see, especially with respect to discipline, is that when girls are dysregulated, there is a tendency to respond to that dysregulation with harsh physical restraint, or with harsh removal from the learning environment, without addressing the root cause or the triggering cause of that dysregulation. And so that is, been the most consistent thing across the board, right? Where educators are saying, but I've got to continue with my classroom. How do I create a trauma responsive space if I have this child who is disruptive? But there's almost never an interrogation of the disruption that that child is experiencing and its relationship to why she might be disruptive in class. And so it all boils down to relationship building and setting the stage and providing a foundation for there to be the relationships in the first place, so that the first time you're engaging with this student in a very real way isn't because she has experienced dysregulation. And many schools, some of which I highlight in the book, have done a great job of finding ways to be consistently in good relationship with young people and identifying, by identifying at least one person on campus that can be a safe person for that student, or by hosting restorative circles in the morning that aren't in response to a particular incident, but that just are an opportunity for them to be in circle with each other and build relationships and establish what they might need to set the tone for the day. These are things that I think we used to do, like these old ways of being, that in our quest to be efficient in some ways we forgot. And we got to go back to that, because ultimately learning is about relationships. It's about how we can bring young people, especially young people who are having a greater degree of exposure to a lot of stuff these days through social media, through our 24-hour news cycle, through a lot of sort of public sites that re-trigger and share traumatic events over and over and over again that impacts the psyche of so many young people. Those things are problematic. The other thing is that by failing to address the adultification and the ways that we think about girls, so when I talk about school to confinement pathways, I talk about them as the policies, practices, conditions, and the prevailing consciousness of what we think about Black girls that renders them vulnerable to future contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. And it's that prevailing consciousness piece, what we think about Black girls, that is very hard to address. But it's the thing that manifests often when we're looking at incident reports in schools, for example, how people are describing the incident, how people are describing the girl, how people will use adjectives and call in an attitude or suggest certain things without recognizing that you only did that for her, and it's not uniform across the board when other students then experience some conflict in schools. And so the absence of consistency, the absence of being able to identify adultifying language, the absence and failure to examine how the curriculum is triggering in many ways, and that violence or that erasure is a form of violence, right? And also that some of the materials that are read because they are classics in the sort of curriculum state are actually triggering of not just the traumas that young people are experiencing maybe in real time, but also the transgenerational trauma of Black and Brown students who explore and experience racial bias, racism, sexism, racialized misogyny, all the things, on a daily basis. And so these are important considerations. And it does require that we think about, the type of education we want to provide, and that many schools are providing. The other thing is that, particularly for young people who are survivors of sexual violence, the way that there is this routine exploration and monitoring, policing of their bodies is problematic. And I've been saying that for a very long time. It is about the body, but it's also about the hair. There are some schools where my hair would not be allowed. It'd be a violation of dress code, where your hair would not be allowed. It'd be a violation of dress code, right? The hair that comes out of our heads naturally is a violation of the dress code. Wow. Right? Where there are schools that have disturbing schools laws where it is actually illegal to loiter or to be loud or to speak in a sassy manner with an adult. I used to ask the question when I would talk about this publicly and out in communities, like, have these people ever worked with a teenager? It was ludicrous. It was like, you just want to make criminal the things that are normal adolescent behavior that require a different set of skills for us to address, not law enforcement. So there are a host of things, that we can do better in schools. And, when I was writing Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, I wanted to demonstrate that many schools and school-based programs are doing things better, right? They are thinking about these very questions. The first time I was met with the idea that suspensions could be off the table, it was because a school principal said, "We don't do that at my school." And I was like, whoa, tell me more, right? And there was, these educators are the ones that inspire me. These are the innovative thinkers that dared to say, no, we're going to love on our children, all of our kids, and really try to challenge ourselves to be a better institution. And those are the ones I wanted to profile in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, and wanted to elevate as a critical question for us as a broader society on what we think about Black girls and how we think about them in response to some of the other big issues that we're addressing in schools, and to also locate Latina and Indigenous girls in this conversation who also experience disproportionate impact at specific stages along the school discipline continuum. And so, wanted to make sure that we're having this conversation in a way that can benefit us, and our, I'll say, our robust development of alternatives to what I've described in Pushout.
You shared so much, and I love all of it. And the thing that's really sitting with me right now is your point about the prevailing consciousness and how that gets in the way of educators being able to hear Black girls advocate for themselves or assert their needs or even ask for help, because it's not being communicated in a way that they feel like is respectful of their position within the school. And last summer, I was presenting to a bunch of educators, and I asked them, like, what are the stereotypes that people hold about Black girls? And the first thing that they said was loud, aggressive, angry, mean, ghetto, sexually promiscuous. And one of the people said, like, these are all so negative, but they don't have to be. Like, we could actually have a positive reframe of so many. Why is she not assertive, right? Why isn't she not smart? Why are we not saying she's like a really good communicator? And it's because of our prevailing consciousness, the bias, the prejudice that we hold about Black girls that prevents us from really hearing what they are demanding of us. And I think they have that right to demand and expect more from us and their educators than what is currently being delivered. And it was so refreshing to read all of these wonderful and beautiful examples, like Stephanie Patton in Ohio, who's doing all of this great work, where they were reframing what it means to hold young people to account. They're not disciplining young people, they are empowering young people. They're helping with goal setting. That's just so refreshing. I'm wondering if you could just talk about some of these examples of ways that schools are kind of flipping the script around, like, how do we respond to the very intensive needs of Black girls in ways that don't reproduce harm, but really reconnect them to the power that they may feel like has been taken from them by the different systems and peoples in their lives.
Yeah, I really love the work that Stephanie did at the Columbus City Prep School for Girls. It is chronicled here in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, and it is also chronicled in the Pushout documentary film. Stephanie is now an area superintendent. Her work got her promoted, which is like, I'm so proud of her. But also, the work has been then, how do we maintain this work that happened at Columbus City Prep School for Girls? How do we maintain the consistency there? The schools that I have found to generate the greatest degree of safety for Black girls and other girls of color are the schools that have taken the time to talk to Black girls and other girls of color about what safety looks like for them. I've often said that education is a local project. Justice is a local project. There are national policies, but the way that it plays out every day happens in a classroom, in a school, in a district, at the local level. And that's important because there are different cultural norms that happen at the local level that inform what is possible and what is probable, good and bad. And so the work that I have seen that's been exciting to me in schools are the schools that have built in opportunities for there to be young people who are decision makers or co-decision makers with adults around the dress code policy, where there are young people who have been co-decision makers with adults around the rules of the classroom. One of the basic examples that I give is that for so many schools, the teacher has established the rules, the kids come in, and the teacher says, these are my rules, this is what it is, abide by them or get out. Instead of working with young people on day one to say, what do you need to feel safe, right? What do you need to have a classroom where you can learn? I used to say that to my grad students. I was like, you shouldn't have to wait till grad school for people to ask you what you need to be present today, right? And many schools that have an opening restorative circle or a circle opening in the morning are asking those very questions. An exciting alternative to policing in schools that I witnessed and that I share in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues was the inclusion of grandmothers as volunteers in schools who were able to hold young people accountable to the rules of the school, and also who did it in a loving and stern grandmother type way that I found personally exciting, but also, that I thought was a brilliant challenge to this notion that the only way to secure safety is by way of law enforcement. I say in Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues that safety does not require a police escort. And I think that that is a really important way to think about what safety is, especially for girls, even when girls can't imagine, because a lot of girls, I've spoken with girls who can't imagine school without police. And it's because, again, a priming has occurred, right? Where the way they understand safety in schools is the way that it's been described to them. The police officers are here to keep you safe. The police are the ones who will, respond if you're in crisis. The issue is that the police in schools are also reinforcing a very problematic priming around surveillance for Black girls that they often experience outside of school, and other students as well outside of school. And the thing that makes them effective, those that are effective in their relationship building with young people that allow girls and others to feel safe with their presence in schools, is not the thing that makes them a cop. It's the thing that makes them a good youth development worker. And that is something that, research that we led when I was still with NBWJI with Georgetown, where we did a look at school resource officers and their work with girls of color, finding that absolutely there were police officers, school resource officers who were going above and beyond the call to build relationships with young people. Absolutely individuals who held the title of school resource officer who was responding to young people in crisis. And everything that they did that was in alignment with them building relationships had nothing to do with their function as a school resource officer. It had everything to do with other training and other skills that they had received in working with young people. So you don't necessarily need a police officer to do that. You need someone to do that and someone to build relationships. That law enforcement is a very specific function in society, and I don't believe it should be in schools routinely. Schools should not have their own school law enforcement agency. The work of law enforcement is not the work of love, and you have to love in schools. And it is not the work of healing. You have to heal in schools. And so I think we've conflated so much because we're moving in a political sphere that, has left us with little imagination, even our girls. And so, what I have often done with girls who have talked about, what would we do in our schools if we didn't have police? I described to them what we did when we didn't have police. Because police were not always in the schools. I remember the shift of young people saying, why do I have so many police officers? And I described why in Pushout. But I think, with this, one of the most precious things that our young people have is their radical imagination, right? Their imagination. And so the more we suppress that, the more we just fall in line in a routine way, sometimes of experiencing harm that goes unquestioned. And so it is important for us to think about alternatives. It is important for us to invest our money in ways that provide opportunities for there to be a deeper analysis around these issues, but also that provides opportunities for us to have more clinicians in schools, more counselors in schools, more food programs in schools, more of the things that keep young people regulated, that keep people in connection with each other, that keep young people building relationships with educators, and educators understanding empathetic and empathic strategies to respond to dysregulated young people so that they are trauma responsive and not exacerbating harm. That these are real strategies that schools are using across the country and in other countries, that does provide an opportunity for us to examine what it is that we're intending to do with our young people and how we can do what is right and participate in our freedom work more intentionally.
What do you say to folks who are teachers, educators who are like, my job is to teach, it's to educate, it's not to heal? How do you respond to that pushback? We've done work with schools where teachers are like, I have so much to do. I have to teach, I have paperwork. If a young person comes to me, I have all the best intentions to support them, but like, where is the time? How can you expect me to support someone's healing when I can't even do my job, which is educate the young folks?
That has been said to me many times. My response is that you will never be able to teach young people until they feel safe in your classroom. That young people will learn when they feel safe. The work of teaching, sometimes we've siloed the work of teaching to think that it is primarily and sometimes only about the transfer of information and engagement around a particular discipline, rather than thinking about the function of teaching and the profession of teaching as being so much more than that. The work of teaching is building relationships. That is the work. That is part of the work, because you won't teach math. They won't learn math from you unless you have this relationship. You cannot be an effective teacher and not have effective relationships with the young people that you're teaching. It's one of the things that I actually love about many of the educators on Instagram who show their relationships with students, and they show the kids, talking to them and engaging with them, and talking to each other and cracking jokes on each other, cracking jokes on the teacher. And, there are ways that the educators demonstrate, through social media, I guess, using the powers for good, right? That you can build relationships with young people, because those young people then turn around and say, okay, I trust this teacher to teach me social studies. I trust this teacher to teach me what it is that I need to know. Young people have told me over and over and over again that, that they want to feel that their educators care about them, and they won't care to learn until they know that you care. And so I think part of what we've got to do is just reorient people's understanding of what teaching is, because teaching is not a robotic practice. Teaching is rooted in relationships, and teaching has to be something that we deeply interrogate, which is why the subtitle of this book is Liberatory Pedagogy, right? Liberatory Education for Black and Brown Girls is really about how we structure our ways and modalities of teaching to reinforce this notion of freedom, to reinforce this notion that education is the critical protective factor against contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. That if we are building out ways of knowing and ways of teaching with young people that allow for them to see their full selves, that is how, that is when we get to the place that requires us to be something other than a robotic teacher who only teaches the discipline, or a robotic instructor, I should say. There's a difference between an instructor and a teacher. Educators, teachers, they've been doing this forever. I had some of those teachers. I'm so grateful to those teachers, right? They were teachers. They understood what I needed. They understood what my classmates needed. They knew what I liked. They knew how to pronounce my name. They knew all these things that mattered, because it showed me that they cared about me. so that when they did say, Monique, stop talking, right? Or when they did say something that was like bothersome, I was like, oh, okay, I'm out of line. Because the relationship was there. A lot of times, many of our educators or folks who are put in our schools haven't considered all that is required for them to be effective in that way. And so the invitation is really for us to think about all the modalities for being a teacher and not just an instructor.
I so very much appreciate that. And one of the things that you have that's come up for me and the things that you shared is how much power sharing we actually have to do, right? Like within schools, there's a sense that there's positional power and there's this hierarchy. As the teacher, you have more power and you are above the student. But you and talking about relationships, there's a give and there's a take. And what we don't do well is recognize the power of students and shaping the educational spaces and environments that they are in. And I feel like that really came through for me in reading this book of just how much we need to center young people, not just, like young youth-centered education, but like actually position them in ways that allow them to make decisions about the educational space and environment that is most supportive to them. And we have to help teachers understand how to share power.
Yeah, I think, power sharing and co-construction. I use the language of co-construction a lot because, young people are co-constructing their environment and will construct other environments if they don't get what they need in, the environments that we create for them. I think early on in the work that I had been doing with girls in gangs and with young people who had experienced trafficking, I saw that there were absolutely real harms that were taking place and real serious issues that were impacting whether young people showed up at school with the mindset to be safe and also with the other skills to be safe, and if the other students in school were safe as a result. And again, I think those experiences around young people who were really experiencing the deepest forms of crisis in some of those ways taught me that until we deal with the disruption, we can't effectively address who is disruptive. And so it just requires different types of relationships. If we call upon law enforcement to engage in a lot of problem solving around social problems, a lot of problem solving around medical issues, a lot of problem solving around mental health conditions, and who we actually need to be calling in are people with the very specific skill sets to be able to manage and work young people through those things. And the co-construction of the learning space, the co-construction of safety is a project that requires time. It is a project that requires us to almost abandon the things that we have understood to be true, because at the core of the prevailing consciousness about young people who are experiencing their deepest form of crisis is this belief that they are disposable. And, my challenge is that I don't believe children are disposable. I don't think anybody is disposable. I think what we do is move into a space that allows for us to create opportunities for their repair, for their healing, for their re-engagement. And that our society's almost singular emphasis on moving people out and getting rid of people and disregarding folks, has made it such that we just are not operational as a community. And, while that might not necessarily be transferable to broader society, it is absolutely something that must be present in a school, in a learning space, in the, I'll say, controlled environment of where we trust adults to transfer information to young people and young people to be in community with other young people when they are learning information from these adults and from each other. And that it just means that we have a different opportunity. I don't know why my camera likes to zoom in and out. I guess for dramatic effect for
I
everybody.
love it. I think it's great. It's like as you lean in, it knows.
Why it does that arbitrarily, but there it is.
Well, we have 9 minutes left, so I do want to open the conversation up to folks who are here with us. So put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. I have it all open. I will ask them as they come up, but I also have more. So I'm going to keep asking questions and address the new ones that come up. So I think one of the things that you said that I think is so important and is relevant to something we were talking about with a new school that we're working with this morning is kind of the humility that we need educators to have to recognize that like they don't know everything. And so actually our young people know more about certain things that are relevant and that they can actually learn from and be responsive to um, what young people are asking for, the conversations, the issues that are coming up in their lives, but like that there's just a humility that we need educators to have that is kind of hard when you're the teacher and the expectation is that you know. And I'm just curious about how do you help educators, instructors become teachers, right? Really kind of cultivate that like hard work and condition that they need to be able to show up in schools for young people. I really appreciate how you describe them as potential ACE buffers, right? Like as people who can help protect young people against kind of the ways in which the trauma and harm they've showed up that has impacted their lives can like show up and dysregulate them sometimes. So how do we help teachers cultivate that kind of humility and condition to show up for young people in that way?
Yeah, I think it's important just to do a lot of personal work also around your own beliefs, your own values. Not everybody's going to be in agreement, but I think that if you work in a school, then you should fundamentally believe in the promise of all children. And if you fundamentally believe in the promise of all children, that means that you've got to do some work to understand, childhood development and understand that whether you are accepting it or not, young people are going to co-construct the learning space with you. And so I think, sort of releasing ourselves to the idea that we are the keepers of information as the teacher, that we're transferring to young people and learning with young people along the way, that there are absolutely opportunities for us to bring in their wisdoms. And in order for us to bring out those wisdoms and for us to understand that young people are capable of being co-constructive in that way, we have to abandon this idea that knowledge is located only in a single individual, and to engage in participatory learning strategies, practices, and opportunities that recognize the distribution of knowledge and that recognize and uplift the things that young people are bringing uniquely to an analysis or uniquely to this. And a lot of teachers are already doing this, really. A lot of teachers are really, wonderfully skilled, wonderfully skilled in that space. And so, I wanted to write Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues because I wanted people to see real people in real time talking about these things and managing these conversations in their schools and creating affinity groups and holding conversations in the schools and among other educators to help sharpen their own analysis of how to, be fully present in a school. One of the important things, that I'll say is, with Stephanie Patton and the work that she did that we profile in the Pushout documentary, one of the things that she did as the principal was reduce some of the unnecessary requirements of teachers and things that often teachers are called to do that are not about teaching, to release the time and give them time back to build relationships with young people. And so I think school leadership matters, right? School leadership matters, as well as an understanding at the district level of what is needed. Volunteers matter. The final chapter of Sing Rhythm Dance the Blues is about volunteering in schools, building relationships with schools, thinking about how we connect with young people in all of the ways so that we can, approach learning collectively. But I think fundamentally, in order for you to recognize that, young people have something to offer in the conversation, you've got to be aware and acknowledge in all the ways that they're co-constructing the learning space, whether you say they are or not. So to be effective, you should work with that, not against it.
I really love that. That's really like landing with me, and that it is always a co-construction, and it's about like, is it a productive environment that we're creating together or not, right? And we have to be working together. So Lauren Humphrey asks, in what ways can we ensure Black girls are considered within policy? You named resources in schools, counselors, etc. What strategies or models help ensure Black girls are considered?
Yeah, I love that question. It was one of the reasons I think Ayanna Pressley put forth in 2019 the Ending Pushout Act that really centered trauma. So take a look at some of the very specific things that are named in that act, because it was done with careful consideration of not just Black girls, but other students who are also uniquely vulnerable to contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system and who have experienced exclusionary discipline. It is important to consider dress code policies, behavioral assumptions, equity policies that are harder and harder to move forward in this climate that we're in, but that do provide foundations and guidance for how to engage in a way that uplifts opportunity for all young people. So that's my quick answer to that. I think you probably have a few more questions, but again, the Ending Pushout Act gives some very specific policy opportunities. The Education Law Center has also done some very specific work. Girls for Gender Equity has done some specific policy work. They have a report that was done a few years back that says the schools girls deserve, and it lists a host of things that were articulated by young people in New York for what they might need and want in schools. And, that was co-constructed with young people. So it'll give you an idea too of some practical ways that young people are thinking about policy and wanting to locate Black girls in that conversation. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry,
Oh, okay.
I was doing too much.
Okay, there you
go. In response to that question, I also just dropped in the chat an evaluation that NBWJI did of Emerge, which is a program that is very much inspired by Dr. Couvson's work, and it's an alternative education program for Black girls and other girls of color who are impacted by the juvenile legal systems and foster care. And they just have done some really innovative things and approaches around how they engage young people in policy, down to even hiring staff. So this is something that we can do. We just have to really think differently and reimagine how we partner with young people, how we can co-construct educational spaces with young people rather than do this kind of top-down approach. It is
just to give one quick example.
Oh yeah.
Oh, just quickly one example from that work, because it actually did grow from my doctoral work, Emerge. And one of the beautiful things was when we were hiring for teachers, the girls were part of the hiring panel. And it was beautiful to witness young people who had experienced. So Emerge is a program that works with girls who have experienced multiple forms of trauma, transgenerational trauma at the intersections of all of their identities. Like a large percentage of the girls are referred to the program by the juvenile court, and have significant histories of exclusionary discipline. And so one of the questions that during the hiring panel for one of the teachers, I remember one student said, "How are you going to act if I'm having a bad day?" And I remember that question so vividly because I was like, that was her question. She was like, you can teach, you can do all these things, but how are you going to act when I'm having a bad day? Are you going to kick me out of the class? Are you going to kick me away? Are you going to take me out of the program? Like, am I no longer able to learn? And it was a very simple question, but it invited so much rigor in terms of an analysis for how we create a learning space that is actually rooted in healing to get that girl to the space where she can graduate, to get that girl into the next phase of her life. And so I offer that as a concrete example of how girls themselves found practice in the co-construction, right? Of their learning space. Yeah.
Thank you. And such an important question to ask anyone, but especially educators, right? Well, I want to say thank you so very much. We are at time, so I want to honor and respect everyone who came to this event. And Dr. Couvson, I mean, I think the world of you, and I'm going to have a mushy gushy moment where I just want to say thank you so much for dreaming up this incredible organization, because I think there are a lot of people, myself included, who feel like the issues that you are demanding that the field think about and really pay attention to have so long been overlooked. And it is just an honor to be able to kind of carry forward this work that you have started and really continue this conversation, and really move systems to have a healing centered approach, not just with young people in schools, but who are impacted by the criminal legal system as well. So I just want to thank you for your work, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will be having more book clubs. And if you are eager to recommend a book that is written by a directly impacted Black woman or a Black woman scholar that helps us understand criminalization, incarceration, punishment more deeply, please shoot us an email, and just please continue to follow our work. And if there's something that you heard tonight that really moved you, please share that with someone, because I plan to do so myself. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to share that I dropped in the chat the endpushout.com website, which is a new series that I'm offering, a series of courses. The first one is Understanding Pushout, that is available to anyone who wants to take the course and to do a deeper dive into some of the strategies for us to end this thing. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being on.
Take good care, everyone.